Peace be upon you. God willing, today I'm going to talk about a sermon I heard the other week, and it was inspired by two articles from Master Tucson, who published the Submitter's Perspective. And for those who aren't familiar with the Submitter's Perspective, it's a newsletter that Master Tucson puts out every month, and it's been ongoing since the time of the Messenger of the Covenant. And for those who aren't subscribed to that, if you're looking for additional places to grow and nourish your soul, it's a great newsletter to subscribe to. But the topic was in regards to thanking God and being appreciative. And this is something that, we can never basically do enough. We can never implore God enough. We can never be appreciative enough. As our growth and understanding in science and the way that, this life, this world comes to play, basically allows us to learn more and be appreciative for more. You think back, how did people understand the world, say, 100 years ago? They had certain information that was bestowed upon them. And you think about all the information we have now as far as how the universe works, how cell biology works, how physics works, how cosmology works. And, with all these tidbits of information that's been given to the human being, it gives us so much more to be appreciative for, because we understand and we comprehend God's creation a little better. And we see the level of detail that God has gotten into to create all this. And it just shows the power of God. And there's no limit to just how much we have to be thankful for. And in 1434 it reads, "And he gives you all kinds of things that you implore him for. If you count God's blessings, you can never encompass them. Indeed, the human being is transgressing, unappreciative." And this is a statement of fact, that the vast majority of people, even with all these blessings, even with all these things to be thankful for, we're still, oftentimes transgressing and unappreciative. And God tells us, that basically if we implore him, he'll respond to us. And one of the first steps to submission is actually just imploring God for everything. I mean, something as small as a parking spot or a delicious meal, or, just getting up in time and not being late or not getting, worked up in traffic. All these things are things that God is telling us and asking us to pray to him for, and that he'll respond. And this is called supplication, and it's a form of worship. And the reason it's a form of worship is because we're showing that our trust and basically all our provisions come from God, that there's nothing too small or too big that God cannot provide for. And in 4060, it reads, the header says, supplication, a form of worship. It says, your Lord says, implore me, and I will respond to you. Surely those who are too arrogant to worship me will enter Gehenna forcibly. And Gehenna is just another word for hell. And it shows, again, our submission to God and our trust in God, that when we implore God for, be it material possessions or for righteousness, all this, it shows that, the source of all our provisions is God. And in 4149 it reads, a human being never tires of imploring for good things, and when adversity befalls him, he turns despondent, desperate. And we have to realize that, when God responds to our prayers, when God provides something to us, and through our context of adversity or hardship, not to become despondent, not to become desperate, to question God. And it's very similar to the last podcast we did in regards to Moses and his teacher. Certain things are going to happen to our life, and we have to trust in God. And we don't want to get to a state where, when things are good, we're happy, we're imploring God, and when things are bad, we lose hope. We have to understand that God has created everything for our benefit, and if we trust in God, if we're steadfast, if we're patient, it'll all become apparent to us. In addition, sometimes we implore God for something that we think is good for us, and it's actually bad. And in 2216, it reads, headers, believers, the ultimate victor. It says, fighting may be imposed upon you even though you dislike it, but you may dislike something which is good for you, and you may like something which is bad for you. God knows while you do not know. And oftentimes we think that, say same example as last week in regards to getting a position at a new job, and we think it's good for us, and we pray to God to give it to us, and it doesn't work out. And we have to trust in God that maybe that wasn't the best job for us, or that God has something better in store for us. And because of all this, we should never forget to thank God. Irrespective of how the outcome appears to us, we have to thank God, because there's so much, absolutely so much to be thankful for. Everything from the air we breathe, the food we eat, the digestive process to process that food to pull the nutrients, the sunlight, the air, the rain. The list goes on and on. And it's unfortunate that we don't thank God enough for, say something like our health, something that, we utilize on such a regular basis until we get sick. And then when we get sick, we constantly implore God to heal us. And as soon as we feel better, unfortunately, many human beings, we forget, and we take it for granted, and then we become unappreciative. And this is a constant theme that we see in 16:53 and 54. It reads, "Any blessing you enjoy is from God, yet whenever you incur any adversity, you immediately complain to Him. Yet, as soon as He relieves your affliction, some of you revert to idol worship." And it's this element of complaining and reverting. God allows these situations to happen to us for our benefit. As weird as it may sound, when we get sick, if this draws us closer to God and makes us more reverent and more conscientious of our actions and our deeds, then that's a good thing. And if it causes us to basically distance ourselves from God, to become unappreciative, to become desperate and hopeless, and that's a bad thing. And at the end of the day, all these occurrences that happen to our life, ultimately, if we're blessed, it's going to be to draw us closer to God. And it hardly ever occurs to us that, something like our eyes, our hands, our feet, everything we have are blessings from God, that God gave this to us in this world so, we can see, we can hear, we can think. And He never asked for anything in return other than the fact of basically taking care of our souls, our real selves. And there's a story that I heard that I think it's pretty profound. So I'm just going to read it. It says, man reached 75 years of age, and he lived a healthy life, but at that time, he was having a lot of stomach pains. He goes to the doctor, and the doctor, diagnoses and tests and says, "Hey, it seems like you have a disease in your stomach." And it says we have to operate. And the guy's, in unsurmountable amount of pain, and he proceeds to with operation. And they do the operation, and he's successful, and he starts to recover. And the doctor gives the patient the bill, and the old man he sees the bill and he just starts crying. And the doctor is thinking like, oh God, he might not be able to pay for this, and explains to him that, hey, there's options, and they can help him with financing and this and that and charity. And the old man responds, says, "I'm not crying because of the money, but I'm crying because God let me eat without any problems for 75 years, and He never sent me a bill." And you think about this, that God gave us, our stomachs, our digestive system, our eyes, our ears, to listen, and all this, and He didn't ask anything in return. He never sent us a bill. All God asked of us is to basically be appreciative, to grow and develop and nourish our souls, to not harm ourselves, and that's it. And if we do these things, not only will we reap the benefits of this life, but we'll be able to sustain being in God's presence in the hereafter. And, clearly all praise is due to God. Being thankful and appreciative is for our own good. If we choose to ignore the blessings God has given us and do not recognize God's hand in our lives, we are the ones who lose. God is in no need praiseworthy. In 31:12 it reads, "We have endowed Lokman with wisdom. You shall be appreciative of God. Whoever is appreciative for his own good. As for those who turn unappreciative, God is in no need praiseworthy." 35:15, "O people, you are the ones who need God, while God is in no need for anyone, the most praiseworthy." God is giving us this guidance, this instruction for our own good. It's kind of like a doctor telling you, hey, you need to eat healthy, you need to exercise, you need to get good amount of sleep, eliminate stress. And the doctor doesn't benefit from this. He's telling it to us for our own good. Similarly, God tells us all these instructions to preserve and grow our souls, our real selves. He tells us, advocates to us to do the contact prayers 5 times a day, to remember God, to be appreciative, to give to charity. These are all things that we will benefit our souls, and God gains nothing. If God wanted to, God could feed every single individual over. He doesn't need our charity. This is for our own good. God is allowing us to grow in righteousness for our own benefit. And all this, it basically circulates around this principle of being appreciative. Being appreciative is a process that includes understanding that everything comes from God and that God controls everything. We have to love God and value Him more than anything else. And when we value God, that's how we show that we love God. In 2:165 it reads, "Yet some people set up idols to rival God and love them as if they are God. Those who believe love God the most. If only the transgressors could see themselves when they see the retribution, they will realize then that all power belongs to God alone, and that God's retribution is awesome." And in Matthew 22:37 through 38, this is actually the greatest commandment according to Jesus, because one of the people asked Jesus, say, "Hey Jesus, what's the greatest commandment?" And this is Jesus' response. It says, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest commandment." It's interesting. I mean, you ask most people, what's the greatest commandment? And they say, like, love your neighbor? And they don't realize that the greatest commandment is to love God, our Lord, with all our heart, all our mind, and all our soul. And, when we love something, we appreciate it. We value it. And you can tell the things that we love, like say if you have a new car, and you love your car, you keep it clean, you give it oil changes, you do all these things for it, and it shows that you value it, you're appreciative of it. And similarly, when we love God, we value God for everything that He's given us, all the guidance, the messengers, the Quran, the translation, the contact prayers, in addition to so many amount of material possessions that God has given us. And if we fail to value God because we don't understand who God is and His qualities and His attributes, then the burden is really upon us. And in 22:74 it reads, "They do not value God as He should be valued. God is the most powerful, the Almighty." You always see this depiction that God is some old man in the sky. And that's not, by any stretch of the imagination correct. God is not just, the creator who's helplessly watching His creations going out of control. God is actively participating in every aspect of creation. From the moment of the Big Bang and before the Big Bang, God guided every single atom, every single neutrino, every single photon for its exact destination. All this precisely calculated by God. God is not too busy for the needs of His creatures because He is to worry about the big stuff. Some people, they make this depiction that, don't bother God with these trivialities, like if you're looking for a parking spot or you're praying that you're not going to be late for an appointment or a meeting. God wants us to constantly implore Him for everything, no matter how trivial it may seem. This is showing our submission to God. God hears us, God sees us. This is one of the attributes of God. He sees all our actions, and God never errs. God never makes a mistake. He never gets tired. One of these myths is that God created the earth and the universe in 6 days and then took the seventh day to rest. This is completely untrue. This concept of being tired, hunger, sleep, these are human characteristics. These are not something that God is limited by. God is not limited by time or space. God is never unaware of every single atom, every single instance in this world, in this universe. And by realizing that, by just trying to grasp who God is, and looking at His attributes, looking at His blessings, we come to realize more about how important it is to implore Him for everything. In 59:22 through 24, these are some of God's attributes. It says, He is the one God, there's no other God beside Him, knower of all secrets and declarations. He is the most gracious, most merciful. He is the one God, there's no other God beside Him. The King, the most sacred. The Peace, the most faithful. The Supreme, the Almighty, the most powerful, most dignified. God be glorified, far above having partners. He is the one God, the Creator, the Initiator, the Designer. To Him belong the most beautiful names. Glorifying Him is everything in the heavens and the earth. He is the Almighty, most wise. 2:255 says, God, there's no other God beside Him, the living, the eternal. Never a moment of unawareness or slumber overtakes Him. To Him belongs everything in the heavens and everything on earth. Who could intercede with Him except in accordance with His will? He knows their past and their future. No one attains any knowledge except as He wills. His dominion encompasses the heavens and the earth, and ruling them never burdens Him. He is the Most High, the Great. And there's so many verses that just constantly are giving us a little glimpse of who God is and just understanding God's greatness. But one of the awesome aspects is no matter how much we learn, there is no limit to understanding the greatness and the vastness of God. And it gives us something to yearn for, something to strive for, that we're never going to get to that point where we say we have it fully figured out. And that's something to just, to always, in essence, to be able to grow our souls. In 6:103 it says, "No vision encompasses him, but he encompasses all visions. He is compassionate, the cognizant." 39:67 it reads, "They can never fathom the greatness of God. The whole earth is within his fist on the day of resurrection. In fact, the universes are folded within his right hand. Be he glorified. He is much too high above needing any partners." And there's so many verses in regards to again, just the greatness of God, and the best place to look to learn God, learn about his attributes, is in the Quran. And God tells us in the Quran, in chapter 73, verse 4, to read the Quran from cover to cover. And one of the takeaways in the Quran is in chapter 14, verse 7. And this is a principal lesson in the Quran. And in my understanding, this is one of the keys to our happiness, to our growth and development in this soul, in this world, both for our souls and for our physical bodies. And I've read so many of these self-help books and listened to so many of these lectures and talks and interviews with people who are studying this concept of happiness, and it all circulates around this one point: to be appreciative. And in chapter 14, verse 7, it says, "Your Lord has decreed, the more you thank me, the more I give you. But if you turn unappreciative, my retribution is severe." And that's it. You want anything in this world, right? And the ultimate thing that every single human being should strive for is happiness, both in this world and in the hereafter, right? Not just the vanities, the material possessions, but when we say true happiness, we're talking about contentment, just fulfillment, both in this life and in the hereafter. And the key is to be thankful. And it says, the more you thank God, the more he gives you. So we can, from this, if you take this in regards to this is a proof that the more you thank God, the more he gives you. But if you turn unappreciative, then God's retribution is severe. That people will receive the provisions that is commensurates to the amount of appreciation that they show. The more appreciative an individual is, the more that they can basically handle as far as provisions. And that has to do both with material provisions and righteousness. And if we get to a point where we cannot handle it, that we become unappreciative, that God gives us a blessing that, as opposed to being thankful and happy for, that we use that as a means to become despondent, to forget God, to get distracted by this world, then we're going to lose it. And a perfect example of that was in chapter, I believe it was 38, with Solomon and the horses. That he was so distracted by his horses that he forgot his contact prayers. And so Satan wanted to make a claim against him. He got rid of his horses. And when he got rid of his horses, God allowed him, he prayed to become the most powerful king on earth, and God gave him that blessing. It's because he proved to himself, to everyone, that the material possessions were not what he was after. What he was after was God's acceptance and basically pleasing God. And if you think about it, if we can grow in appreciation, grow in our understanding of everything we're thankful for, God will continue to give us more. And if we get to the point that we become unappreciative, then we know where we hit our limit, and we need to basically work harder and more to basically be able to handle more. And there's a couple ways, I've been practicing myself and, listening to others as far as how we can grow in appreciation. One of them is very simple. Each night before you go to bed, this is something I try to practice, is I just count, 10 blessings that happen either in the day or just in general that I'm thankful for. And I just reflect upon that. And that's, I try to leave that as, one of the last thoughts I have before going to bed is, hey, these are 10 things that happen in my day or in my life that I'm thankful for. And it can be thankful for a Quran study, for the food I had, maybe I had a delicious meal, the air I breathe, the bed I'm sleeping in, the roof over my head, whatever. I just try to think of 10. Some people, they advocate having a appreciation journal where as things happen in your life that you become appreciative for, you put that into a journal. Now, one of the more interesting methods is something known as the George Bailey technique. And this takes kind of a twist on the appreciation journal. And the argument behind that is this, and this came from an article from the Art of Manliness website, and they also have a podcast, which is pretty entertaining in itself. The principle behind this was that some people, when they have just an appreciation journal, it doesn't work for them, and they actually did studies where they found that in some participants it works great, and then for other participants it just doesn't have that same level of effect. And what they attribute is to what's known as the pleasure paradox, or another word for this is habituation. When you have a blessing and it becomes commonplace, eventually it wears off. That kind of like that element of just happiness, the joy you felt when you first received that, you become used to, and you can constantly remind yourself back to it. But as human beings, we have this tendency of habituation, where whatever our environment is eventually becomes commonplace, and our brain, not to exert too much power on something, will just kind of fade it out. So all of a sudden, you get a new car, you're extremely thrilled about it. Eventually, it becomes commonplace, and you don't have that same level of appreciation you did on day one. Now, you can constantly reflect back, but that takes a bit of effort. Now, the George Bailey technique, it's actually taken from a old movie called what was the name of it? It's What a Wonderful Life. My apologies, yeah. So it's a classic movie. It's called What a Wonderful Life. And the whole premise of this is the main character, George Bailey, he gets into a rut, and he wants to take his own life, and he makes this wish that he wishes he was never born. And when he wished that he was never born, basically an angel takes him back and shows what life would have been like if he was never there. And certain things in his life that were actually quite well end up being tragic, like his younger brother, who he rescued at the age of 9. If he wasn't there, wouldn't be able to be rescued, so he was dead. He has another brother who through a series of tragic events ends up being very poor, and just he sees all these things that happen in his life that wouldn't have taken place if he didn't live. And the George Bailey technique is this. It's basically take something in your life that you're appreciative for, and imagine what it would be like if you didn't have it. Here's a simple thing. Take your hands. Something that we use every day, that we never think of, that we can type with these, we can drive with these, we can play video games with these, we can cook, we can clean, we can do all these things, we can touch, we can grab stuff, and imagine what life would be like without your hands. What they recommend is write about what life would be like if you didn't have that item. What if you didn't have the sense of smell? What would life be like if you couldn't smell stuff? And you think about this, it allows people, in essence, for a lot of people, to be able to get a deeper level of appreciation. And it's very similar to health. When we lose our health, when we get sick, when we get ill, when we have a headache, all of a sudden we appreciate just how awesome it was when we didn't have, the issues with this, when we didn't lose it. And same thing, like something like your cell phone. Imagine if you lost your cell phone, how much of a headache, how much of a hardship that might be. And it's the same thing is when you take that in consideration, that imagine you don't have that one item, that one attribute anymore. How would life be for you? And by being able to dwell on that, in essence, it allows us to grow in appreciation. And when we grow in appreciation, we can handle more. And you think about this is a very key element to our success, is because the more appreciative we are, the more God gives us. And inshallah, the more we can grow and understand. And by doing this, we benefit both physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, which is the most important. So God willing, let's end there. And if you guys got any comments or questions, feel free to email us at QuranTalk@gmail.com. And feel free to rate us on iTunes, good, bad, it's all the same. Get us up there, and inshallah we can spread the word. Until next time, peace and God bless.